Chapter 8. The Story of Prophet Yusuf Joseph. Part 1. Prophet Yusuf and his mummy Rachel were the most beautiful people on earth. His father's name was Prophet Yaqub. He had a younger brother called Benjamin and 10 older brothers. Prophet Yaqub loved his young son very much because he had such good qualities and was also very protective of him. His brothers were not happy about this. One day Prophet Yusuf had a dream. He dreamt that the sun, the moon and 11 stars bowed before him. His father knew straight away that this dream meant that he was a prophet. He told his son not to mention his dream to his brothers because they are very jealous and will hurt him. But the young prophet told his brothers of the dream. They were very angry. They even thought about killing him. But then they came up with another idea. They planned to take him to a well and leave him in it. The children all gasped with sadness on their faces. So, one day the evil brothers persuaded their father to let Prophet Yusuf accompany them to the fields where they farmed. At first the father didn't agree because he was afraid that the brothers will hurt him. But after reassuring him that they will take good care of the young prophet, he gave his permission. "And did they leave him the well?" asked Musa. "Yes, they did, Musa," replied Nanny Serena. "Prophet Yusuf must have been very scared in the well," said Layla. "That's right, Layla," replied Nanny. "Prophet Yusuf was only a young boy and he was so scared in that deep well. He spent many nights and days there. And then one day there were some travelers looking water and found the prophet." "Did they return him to his father?" asked Aaron. But Nanny told the children they did not. These travelers were not good people. They put him in chains and took him to Egypt to sell him as a slave. Seth was so sad on hearing what they did to the prophet, and with his eyes filling up with tears he asked, "What happened to him?" Nanny told the children that the young prophet was taken to the market to be sold as a slave. The market was full of people and they were all amazed how beautiful Prophet Yusuf was. Everyone wanted to buy him. The prophet was bought by the Aziz of Egypt. He gave them a small bag of silver coins and took the prophet to his palace. He removed his chains and told the prophet Yusuf he could live with his family, but he must never betray his trust. The prophet lived happily in the palace for a while. But then it all changed. The Aziz's wife, Zuleika, made up lies about the young prophet. She told that he tried to kiss her. The fact of the matter was she tried to seduce him, and as he was running away from her she grabbed his shirt from the back, tearing it. At the same time the door opened. It was her husband, the Aziz, and his friends. Zuleika tried to lie to everyone that it was the prophet who had tried to seduce her. But they knew she was lying because his shirt was torn from the back. Nonetheless, some of the news of this incident got to the women friends of Zuleika, and the women started to talk about the incident. They mocked her, saying that she lusted after one whom they thought was a young, lowly slave. They had not seen Yusuf yet. A furious Zuleika got news of the gossiping, so she came up with a plan. She invited these women to her home. She prepared a meal and gave them each a knife. As the women started cutting their fruits, Zuleika invited Yusuf in the room. When the women saw Yusuf, they were so entranced by his beauty that they began to cut their hands with the knives without noticing. They exclaimed, "This is not a human, but a generous angel." At that, Zuleika told them, "This is the man about whom you blamed me. I tried to seduce him, but he refused." The evil woman then told Yusuf he doesn't do what she asked him to do, she will put him in prison. To that Prophet Yusuf replied, "The prison is more dear to me than sinning." Joseph made du'as to Allah to relieve him from the scheming of the women, and to make him pure from sin. Allah fulfilled Joseph's supplication. Zuleika became enraged and lied to her husband. She told him that the prophet had told all the women of her seduction and demanded he be imprisoned. Although the Aziz had liked Yusuf, he wanted the accusations against his wife to settle down and had the prophet imprisoned. In prison everyone was amazed how beautiful the prophet was. They thought that he was an angel. Whilst in prison Allah blessed him with the ability to interpret dreams. Soon, there was 2 new inmates, the cook and the cupbearer. They wanted the prophet to interpret their dreams. The cook dreamt that there was some bread on top of his head and two birds were eating it. The prophet prayed to Allah and then told him that it means that he will be crucified until he died. The cupbearer then told of his dream. He dreamt that he was in the palace serving the king. Again, Prophet Yusuf prayed and interpreted his dream. He told the cupbearer that he will be a free man and will work in the palace again. Both of his interpretations came through. Before the cupbearer was set free, Prophet Yusuf told him to tell the king that he was wrongfully put into prison and must be freed. Unfortunately, Shaitan made the cupbearer forgot the message and he didn't tell the king of this injustice. Prophet Yusuf remained in prison for a few more years. One night the king had a very frightening dream. He saw that he was standing on the bank on the river Nile and all the water had gone. There was only mud. The fishes were gasping for breath because there was no water. After that he saw that Nile had water again and 7 fat cows were coming out from the water. Afterwards, 7 lean cows came out. All the lean cows were swallowed by the fat ones. Then he saw 7 years of green corns growing by the river bank. It then disappeared with 7 years of withered corns. No one in the palace was able to interpret the king's dreams. It was then cupbearer remembered Prophet Yusuf. He told the king about the prophet. He related how the prophet interpreted his and the other prisoners' dreams. He also told of the great injustice that Prophet Yusuf suffered. The king commanded the cupbearer to meet with the prophet and to ask him to interpret his dream. This he did. Prophet Yusuf then prayed to Allah. He gave the interpretation as follows. 7 years of rich harvest in the kingdom and people will have plenty of food. Then there will be 7 years of drought in the kingdom and people will not have enough in Egypt and all the neighboring lands. The king was very pleased with the interpretation and demanded that Prophet Yusuf set free. Was he released then, Nanny? Asked Layla. No, Nanny answered. The prophet wanted his innocence to be proven, so he refused to leave the prison. Nanny continued. What happened then? Inquired Musa. Nanny went on to tell the children what took place. The king ordered an inquiry and summoned Zuleika and the gossiping women. This time she told the truth and finally Prophet Yusuf was set free from prison. The king was very impressed by the prophet's knowledge and asked for more information about his dream. Prophet Yusuf advised that the king should plan for the famine ahead. He also told the king that the famine will not only affect Egypt but all the neighboring countries. The king was so impressed by Prophet Yusuf that he appointed him to work in the kingdom. He was put in charge of the granary. His job was to guard the harvest and make plans for the upcoming famine. In the 7 prosperous years all the crops were harvested and stored, so when the period of famine will begin there will be enough food. Prophet Yusuf met his brothers. The famine period had started. There was severe drought and all the crops died. But the people were not hungry because the prophet planned well. There were more than enough grains stored to feed not only the people of Egypt but the neighboring lands as well. I guess the king was very happy with Prophet Yusuf because of the plentiful food, related Layla. He was Layla, voiced Nanny. But the humble prophet refused to take any credit. He said it was all from Allah. The people in the nearby land made no plans for this famine and they had no food. The kind prophet advised the king to sell the grains to them very cheaply as everything they have is from Allah. In that way they will save many lives. The king listened and did exactly what the prophet advised. This drought spread to Canaan, Jerusalem, where the prophet's family lived. News reached them about the abundance of grains being distributed in Egypt. Prophet Yaqub sent 10 of his sons to go to Egypt to buy the grains. Didn't Benjamin go? Inquired Musa. Prophet Yaqub didn't want to send his youngest child with them, replied Nanny. He suffered a lot when Prophet Yusuf didn't return home all those years ago. When the brothers arrived at the palace, Prophet Yusuf recognized them straight away, but they did not know him. He gave them the grains and asked after his younger brother Benjamin. The brothers told him that their father will not allow to take him with them. The prophet suggested that they bring Benjamin and he will double the supply of grains. The prophet then did a very kind thing. He returned their gold coins by hiding them in one of the grain sack. They went home and related their experience to their father. Prophet Yusuf had told the brothers they must never re-enter Egypt without Benjamin. Prophet Yaqub finally agreed. So all 11 brothers set out for Egypt. When Prophet Yusuf saw his little brother, he was so happy. Tears welled up in his eyes. They agreed for the time being their relationship will remain a secret. The next day arrived and the brothers were preparing to make their journey home. Prophet Yusuf felt very sad because he will miss his little brother. So, he thought of a clever plan. He placed the king's golden cup in Benjamin's grain sack. He hoped that his brother will be accused of stealing and hence he will remain in the palace with him. His plan worked. The brothers were very sad. The eldest brother Uday begged Prophet Yusuf to take him instead. They were so worried about facing their father without Benjamin. Uday decided he will not return to Canaan and will remain in Egypt until his little brother will be released. The prophet was happy because he was testing the brothers. He is convinced that they all genuinely care for Benjamin. He also looked after Uday when he remained in Egypt. The remaining 9 brothers with heavy hearts made the long journey back home. The father was waiting in front of his house awaiting their return. The brothers explained everything that happened at the palace. When Prophet Yaqub heard the story of what happened at the palace, he realized that Allah is putting him through another test. First with Prophet Yusuf and now with Benjamin. He prayed to Allah to give him patience and to strengthen his faith. At this point the prophet became blind because of his tears. Upon their father's request, all the sons returned to Egypt sometime later. They collected Uday and once again faced Prophet Yusuf begging and pleading for the safe return of their little brother. Convinced that all his brothers were sincere in their love for Benjamin, the prophet revealed his identity. The brothers became very fearful and begged for Prophet Yusuf's forgiveness. The prophet told his brothers how forgiving and merciful Allah is, and since they will be forgiven by the Creator, he will forgive them too. They all hugged and embraced each other. Given he was an important official in Egypt, he could not leave with them, but he sent one of his shirts to his father. He instructed his brothers to throw this shirt on his father's face and he will regain his sight. As the brothers' camels were approaching Canaan, Prophet Yaqub came out of his room. He told everyone he could smell Prophet Yusuf in the air. His daughters-in-law felt that the prophet will die in grief over Prophet Yusuf. They didn't believe him that he could sense the smell of his beloved son. Finally, the brothers arrived home and again retell what happened at the palace. They placed Prophet Yusuf's shirt over his face. Prophet Yaqub can see again. The brothers were genuinely sorry for the way they treated their younger brother, Prophet Yusuf, and begged their father to seek forgiveness from Allah. Like Prophet Yusuf, their father also told the brothers about the mercy of Allah, and so long as they remain pious people, Allah will forgive them and shower his mercies. Prophet Yaqub and all of his sons went to Egypt. It was a very exciting time for the old prophet. He had longed for so many years to meet his son, and finally it was going to happen. When Prophet Yusuf saw his father, he exploded with joy. He placed his father on the throne. Then Prophet Yaqub and all of his 11 brothers bowed down to the Prophet Yusuf. And that was the interpretation of the dream he had as a child. The sun, the moon and 11 stars bowed down to the Prophet. And children, that's how the Bani Israel ended up in Egypt.